Consumer Bankers Association is pleased to welcome you to today's presentation, Getting Back to Growth, Strategies for Success, presented by Bridgeforce. My name is Sheridan, and it is my pleasure to be the facilitator for today's event. I would like to formally welcome the participants who are joining us today. Please note that today's call is being recorded and all participant lines will be muted during the broadcast. If you are listening to the program over the phone and you need assistance at any time, you can press *0 and an operator will help you. If you're experiencing technical difficulties with the web portion of today's program, you can send an email to cba@compartners.com or send a message in the chat box. This presentation will last up to 60 minutes and will include a question and answer opportunity at the end. However, you can submit a question at any time by typing it into the chat box in the lower left corner of the screen, and then be sure to click on the send button. In addition, I would like to direct your attention to the links box located to the left of the screen. Documents and resources are located there for you to view, save, or print. Simply click on the link of your choice and a separate web browser window will open, and this will not interfere with your viewing of the presentation. This presentation will also contain live polling questions. When a question appears, simply click directly on the slide in the box next to the answer of your choice. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's presenters, Michelle McCartney and John Sanders. Michelle McCartney is Managing Director of U.S. Banking Practice at Bridgeforce. Michelle has over 25 years of experience in the financial services industry with a focus on the effective delivery of project management and professional services. She has extensive experience in managing the development and delivery of software and analytics products in support of consumer and the small business lending. In her capacity with Bridgeforce, Michelle has established and managed the project management office functions for some of their largest U.S. engagements focused on mission-critical regulatory compliance and operational improvements. Most recently, she has led credit bureau management compliance engagements to help clients quickly satisfy regulatory accuracy and integrity expectations. Michelle holds an MBA in Business Management and a BA in Business, Music, and Computer Science from Baldwin-Wallace College. John Sanders is co-founder and Managing Director of Capital Markets and Non-Bank Lenders at Bridgeforce. John has over 20 years of professional experience, including progressive management positions in the financial services industry and entrepreneurial leadership roles in early-stage companies. He has spent his career successfully starting and profitably running new business ventures, including co-founding Bridgeforce, a specialized consulting firm to the world's top lending institutions with in-depth knowledge of client-side lending and payments environments. During this time, Bridgeforce achieved an international presence, attracted Fortune 500 clients, Fortune 50 clients, and was dubbed the premier consultancy in its field within just a few short years of inception. John rejoined Bridgeforce in May 2014 as part of its continued capital markets expansion, working closely with the non-bank sector and investment community on a pre- and post-transaction basis. He holds 2 bachelor's degrees in business management and economics from Towson University and a minor in music performance. Michelle and John, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Sheridan. Good afternoon, and thank you everyone for joining us today to hear about some strategies that Bridgeforce is recommending to help you grow your business. Now that the financial crisis has eased, while there is still very much an emphasis on regulatory compliance matters, we are hearing from our clients that they are finally now getting to look ahead to growth strategies. Today, we will share several specific and actionable strategies that you can use to increase both growth and profitability. We are going to explore 3 areas of growth strategies. The first focuses on customer experience. The landscape has shifted related to customer interaction. In order to differentiate yourself from the competition and grow, the customer experience must be seamless across the end-to-end credit lifecycle process. The ease of doing business is a more important factor than ever. The second area will focus on retention strategies, which are more critical than ever. New competition in the form of what some refer to as market disruptors or other labels such as marketplace lenders, alternative lenders, non-bank lenders, etc., have all driven a need to focus on retention strategies. Action needs to be taken to keep your existing customers as part of your overall growth strategy. And finally, the third area, we'll explore how some good credit risks exist today that may not appear as such at first blush when you examine those based on traditional origination and portfolio management approaches. We assert that there are opportunities to enhance decisioning strategies to find the diamonds in the rough to grow your portfolio. So going back to the first area of the customer experience, in order to have a focus on the end-to-end customer experience that we noted as the first strategy area, you first need to know who is your customer. Now, in the past, banks would use marketing strategies to attain or retain customers pretty much based on how they wanted to interact with customers. Today, in the present, customers use technology to seek out banking and credit needs on their terms. Though millennials seem to be all the rage and are getting much of the headlines, it's important to note that all generations are demanding a very tailored customer experience more than ever before, with technology as the driving factor. The opportunity is growing as new credit participants are entering the borrowing arena, and they are driving the change in how consumers shape the credit distribution channels. The bottom line is this: consumers perceive banking and lending as a commodity. The key is, how can you differentiate yourself to your customer to engender some loyalty? Now, I may be repeating myself, but it's really important to understand that developing a customer-focused experience requires you to know what the customer really wants. Alternative lenders have taken advantage and filled the void for fast, convenient, customer-friendly banking solutions. For financial institutions, you can grow by listening to the customer's needs and meeting them throughout the process. A changing customer is driving this. They are better educated, affinity agnostic, and are not investing in a brand as much as they have in the past. At this point, I'd like to welcome my colleague, John Sanders, to comment. As noted in the introduction, John is a co-founder of Bridgeforce and oversees our capital markets and non-bank practice. Given his function, he has a unique view of marketplace lenders, including from an investment perspective, as well as his work with marketplace lenders directly. John?
Sure, yes, thanks, Michelle, and good afternoon, everyone. I think it's quite simple. The emergence of marketplace lenders is relevant, both in terms of the need to fill a consumer and small business lending void, as well as the advances in online and digital technology. And beyond being relevant, it's certainly the view of many that these lenders are now a permanent change to the industry. On the next slide, I think that we'll depict a concept of convenience credit that is fairly self-explanatory. Advancements in technology have over time made it more convenient to perform banking functions as seen here and provide consumers more readily access to credit. So what do consumers want, and what is the fintech sector aspiring for? Well, what we're seeing is the following, and I realize for some on the call this might be stating the obvious, but even so, then it's important to ask ourselves, why hasn't this been addressed before? Marketplace lenders are striving for speed of customer transaction, no question. They're certainly looking for a seamless customer experience. Think Uber car service. The ability to scale quickly. They're looking for lower transaction costs, removal of unnecessary complex processes, and going forward, one digital experience, frankly, across all asset classes. As one marketplace lender recently put it to me, imagine a future in where by the press of just one button, you as a consumer are funded for a loan. So instead of 48 days, it's a 48-hour time frame to turn around a credit decision. Well, how about 48 seconds? So if we bring it all together, can you imagine by clicking one button, your social security number coupled with other big data sources, perhaps say QuickBooks, accounting information, etc., renders an approval decision, and better yet, the funds are deposited real time into your account. And then, by the way, you happen to do all of this through your mobile phone while, say, wrapping up a business dinner waiting for the check to arrive from the waiter. Ridiculous? Well, certainly not according to some visionaries in the marketplace lending world. I heard this similar concept shared by a fellow named David Klein, CEO of a company called Common Bond, just a few weeks ago. And the point is, the data is digitized already in different parts of the cyber world, and folks are spending enormous effort to get to what's thought of as phenomenal customer service, as he coined it, the emphasis being on phenomenal. So at risk of over-sensationalizing this, just to get folks thinking, I would say that the future could very well be one-click lending. At the end of the day, one thing is undeniable: the level of conversation with regards to how to best service and retain the customer has clearly risen to levels that we haven't seen in years.
Thank you, John. Now, despite all that we've said in the last few minutes about newer technologies, at the same time, you cannot abandon traditional customer service. The reality is that your customer wants it all. One survey that we reviewed indicated that 59% of customers interviewed agreed that automated self-service options have increased customer service for them. However, 50% of the customers still pick up the phone to contact customer service when they can't find information online. The bottom line is that your customers want access to credit on their terms, via the channels that they prefer, when they prefer it, and that means you need to provide a variety of communication options for your customers. Now, we would like to understand how you evaluate your institution's current state for providing convenience credit. So this is the first of two polls that we have for you today. Here's the question that we are asking you to answer. How do the communication channels for your post-booking servicing areas, such as customer service, collections, and recovery, how do those compare to the pre-booking areas such as acquisition and the application process? If you believe that you have more channels available for the post-booking areas, click on A. If you think they're about the same, click on B. And if you think there are less channels available for post-booking, click on C. I'll give it just a few more moments as I still see some votes coming in. And I think we've got most of the votes in here, and, well, it's shifting. Everybody should see, it looks like we've landed kind of where we expected it would, telling us that of those of you who have replied to the poll, about 59% say that you have fewer channels available in your post-booking service areas as compared to other areas. So what's the key takeaway here? Well, we would assert that to differentiate your company and rise above and beyond the commodity market that lending is becoming, a focus on customer service and providing an enhanced experience throughout all transactional interactions and decisioning is really key. Bottom line, and again, I'm repeating myself, but that's because this is really important to understand, is that you need to interact with your customer in the manner in which they want to be interacted with across the entire life cycle. The best way to tackle this is to extend the tools and resources that have already been built in your organization. So we're not here to tell you that you have to go rebuild or build from scratch. Rather, leverage the tools across the enterprise that may already exist in some areas, particularly, as the poll would tell us, more so in the pre-booking area. Leverage those across the enterprise to ensure that interactions are providing a consistent experience and that interactions between different channels are connected. So, for example, then an interaction in the mobile channel could also be seen in a customer service station for someone who may pick up the phone to answer a customer's question. An action item for those of you who work in the servicing or default organizations is to go back and look at your list of customer experience projects that you could tackle and understand where the tools may already exist within your organization to fulfill these needs. As you consider the customer experience, do so with an eye to removing the silos. Think always in terms of broad data capture and structures, again, to provide that very consistent experience for your customers. We have talked thus far about knowing your customer and how the lending landscape has been shifting with regards to how customers want to interact. Now we'll spend a few minutes talking about how to retain the customers that you already have amid what some refer to as this market disruption. As a portfolio manager, your growth strategy absolutely needs to include retention strategies. Now, while there are some perceived advantages for the new entrants right now because they have touted cost advantages, and maybe they don't have the overhead right now in the form of compliance and back-end systems, the reality is that the more we look under the hood, their black box becomes more mysterious, and we really don't see that they have something all that unique and novel. The ones who are honest are putting a lot of effort into the back end to make the front end effortless. This presents an opportunity for the incumbents in this market. Questions to think about are those that appear here. When your customers are looking to consolidate existing lines of credit, credit cards, etc., will you be considered when your customer moves in that direction? What is the competition that you are facing from the market disruptors for going after your existing clients? And as your organization initiates change, what is the experience that you are delivering to your customers, and what lasting impressions do they have? John, I think that you have some thoughts to share about the dichotomy that exists here.
Sure, Michelle. Yeah, I mean, I guess in some it's fairly interesting times right now. And in terms of talking with marketplace lenders this time last year, speaking for myself, it was nearly impossible to have a conversation without hearing the word disruption. And now the position and tone have largely shifted. We're hearing things like, we're not here to disrupt, we're here to partner. And it's often the remark. So to me, why is that? And I think it's perhaps because everyone shares the same goal, and that is everyone wants and needs customers. Lenders take on risk, and they want return. So in the same breath, we certainly see the other side of the coin with our larger incumbent financial institution clients. Many are intrigued, certainly pulsing this sector to obtain learnings. But I find the motivations, however, frankly, vary. Some have publicly announced that they're looking to establish partnerships with marketplace lenders. Others take a bit of a more cynical approach, I'd say. This would include whether or not marketplace lenders are really in the game for the long haul and are generally interested in building loyalty and long-term customer relationships. So I think to that end, marketplace lenders are viewed as competition. When you step back and think about it, banks in general have a lower cost of capital, and they can use it to compete with marketplace lenders. In fact, a conversation I had with someone just last week, I mean, if you really think about it, banks have almost every conceivable advantage in the space. But whether they take advantage of it or not is going to be the question. And I think now is also, Michelle, perhaps an appropriate time to talk a little bit more about sort of separating fact from fiction or myth from reality. And again, believe me, I qualify what I'm about to say by noting that there's no doubt marketplace lenders have really pushed the envelope recently, especially in terms of getting the industry to think differently about how to best service customers, obviously in faster and newer ways, and leverage the online lending channel. I'll tell you what, Michelle, can you kindly flip to the next slide? So, I think here it's sort of a chess match, if you will, between marketplace lenders and financial institutions. And right now I would argue it's probably the FI move. I would tell you that I'm not personally convinced that marketplace lenders possess a material advantage over traditional FIs. And I often joke that the secret sauce or black box becomes larger and more ominous and amorphous every day. Using more data in an effort to better understand risk is something many banks have done for years. When I was doing it 25 years ago, we didn't call it big data. We called it analytics. Now I'm certainly intrigued by some of the new data elements that could be used to say, confirm information. So, for example, social media, Facebook likes, foot traffic on Google Maps, and so on might provide a confidence level that a small business's reported revenue is likely what they say it is. In fact, in a real-time update, I saw that Renaud Laplanche, Lending Club CEO, made remarks yesterday at a conference in New York about factors that went into determining creditworthiness online. And he shared some interesting things, a couple examples related to data leverage for fraud detection. But he also mentioned Yelp reviews and Google search trends to determine credit risk for small businesses. And while hundreds of factors like these go into determining applications beyond consumer credit scores, I found it most interesting that he recognizes the checklist developments is very fluid, and he even went on to state that they build a new underwriting model every 6 months. So that's perhaps something to think about. But back to point, financial institutions can certainly mine its deposit relationships and discern cash flow and glean other valuable insights that might be pretty useful. And that's just one example. Second, we're starting to see, ironically, despite all of the fancy things touted about online lending, some marketplace lenders are actually leveraging direct mail. Again, a practice used for over 2 decades to direct folks to their online sites. And then third, something I think about, but it would be too much detail to address in this webinar, is that financial institutions that are certainly focused on prime and super prime portfolios may enjoy some more favorable capital implications in accordance to FAS and Basel. Right now, marketplace lenders are not subject to that, but if and when they are, that will be of impact. I think most people realize, being in the industry, that the composition of FI portfolios that are stratified more towards prime and super prime results in lower capital requirements. Certainly, you would expect lower reserves for loan losses, and longer term provides them with a distinct advantage.
Thanks, John. That's some really interesting insight there. So we look, as John said, we look at the current situation as something of a chess match. So you think about the game of chess, and factors such as timing and position on the board are key. A healthy tension on the board helps keep the game in play. And now it's really the financial institution's move. And here are some moves that we think you can consider. To differentiate yourself from the competition, identify your at-risk customer segments and ensure that you're pricing them effectively. Consider ways that you can enhance the perceived ancillary benefits such as rewards and other features on the products that you offer. Cannibalize your at-risk segments yourself by offering them a more enticing product before the competition gets to them. And you can become the competition. Look at how you can create and market attractive offers that go head-to-head with the competition to source new customers. As John indicated a few moments ago, consider partnering with some of these non-bank competitors. They may have leapfrogged you with the technology to attract customers, but they're also looking to sell new accounts so that they keep originating, and there's an opportunity to partner with them on second look strategies. And finally, take a look at the prices versus process trade-offs and consider that customers are actually willing to pay for some convenience. For example, take a look, if you're in the small business world, take a look at the small business application process. That has been a fairly onerous one. And seek to understand the intersection of credit risk and the faster application process and the convenience that you can offer to tailor something that is really attractive to keep and retain your customers. So now we go to the third area of that we refer to as finding diamonds in the rough. There's been, as we know, some casualties from the financial crisis, and we think that there's an opportunity to find some good credit risks where you might not think to find them otherwise. So here's our second poll question of the day. Pretty straightforward. Do you believe that the level of consumer credit access is currently A, too much, B, about right, or C, not enough? I'll give everybody a few moments to respond here. I see some changing answers, but I see that, again, all of you who are responding are reinforcing what we thought we would hear, which is a pretty heavy weight to C, not enough. So what does that mean? We believe that given the recent economic events in terms of the financial crisis and the subsequent recovery, combined with what has happened in the digitalization world, that there's a need to explore. Thus, we talk about this in terms of searching for the diamonds in the rough. Now, for the purpose of our discussion today, we're going to focus primarily on two segments. First is what we classify as the rising stars. These are potential customers who, due to the events that hit them during the financial crisis, probably display a pretty rough past, but may in fact present a bright future in terms of their viability as a credit risk. The other segment that we're going to talk about are the invisibles, who have no or thin credit history and often are unable to thus be scored using traditional approaches. Now, these are by no means an exhaustive list of segments, as we could also look at another category such as the business bloomers, which would be sole proprietors and other life cycle stage graduates who are successfully establishing themselves and thus are good candidates for new credit products. Though our discussion is focused on consumers as we explore the rising stars and the invisibles, consider that much of what we'll be reviewing is also applicable to small business customers. So who are these rising stars? Well, there were approximately 70 million adult potential borrowers with traditional FICO scores of less than 660. Influencing these scores is that during the economic crisis, bankruptcies and foreclosures doubled, greatly increasing the number of borrowers who carry the stigma of incurring a significant default event during that time. You can see here the difference in originations of credit cards and mortgages for this population when you compare the volumes of originations pre-crisis to current times. It's significant. The volume of negative events affected many individuals who will or have recovered. Consider that from 2006 to the present time, there have been about 16.8 million foreclosures and 10.8 million bankruptcies. So what this means is that typical score decimator metrics that consider activities that occurred during the crisis period, such as bankruptcy, collections, default, foreclosure, and late payments, all include a segment of what we believe are highly unlikely repeat offenders. Thus, the approaches that many of us have taken of once a deadbeat, always a deadbeat, which, do function reasonably well during times of normal variance economic periods can leave good credit risks behind. It's important to note that non-bank consumer lenders, in the form of the digital alternative lenders, have been capturing this segment for 5 to 6 years, but there is really little unique to their credit models despite what they say. Given this backdrop, we assert that a customer's history does not always repeat itself. Thus, it's important to understand a potential customer's credit story. Now, most bank credit models would process the information as displayed in this chart, and based on this, decline the applicant. When you consider the credit story and not just the credit history, this approach may be just fine. But the credit history tells us what happened, but not really why it happened. If loss of income due to a job loss, for example, took place at different spots on the curve, the risk assessment story changes dramatically. If there was never an income loss or major decline in income, that tells a very different story. These credit history curves and data points can represent multiple stories, some that would lead to a positive outcome and others not. Now, the past being representative of the future is always tricky due to what statisticians call relevant range issues. Because the future is, by definition, new, all predictive time series methods are subject to substantial noise. This noise is most pronounced when the deltas among the past, such as the economic crisis, the present, which is relative recovery and calm, and the likely, but of course never guaranteed future to be relatively bright, when the deltas among these are the greatest. This is precisely why understanding and vetting applicant credit stories, and not just the histories, are more important today than in other recent periods. Ask yourselves this: do you believe that consumer economics during the post-Great Depression era were able to be predicted by Depression period credit events? So how can you find some of these rising stars? Well, first, we suggest that you review your current credit policies to determine if some of your current underwriting rules are automatically rejecting applicants in a way that prevents you from discovering their credit story. This also applies to your portfolio management strategies. Examine those closely to determine if you might be excluding some current customers from entering, as an example, credit line increase strategies who could now be a good risk for increased credit. Assess how you are determining ability to pay. Consider various sources to verify income and cash flow. Now, when we look at the charts, A variety of factors may have happened during the crisis to previously good customers. This could be, again, in the form of the bankruptcies, first-time late pays and defaults, or foreclosures. It's helpful to analyze your data and create a visual representation of repeated observations of the same variables over a period of time so that you can view the correlations and segment your customers and applicants into distinct populations based on behavior as a way to find a few of those diamonds in the rough. You want to take calculated risks to separate between the always bad population and those that are best characterized as recently bad due to the crisis who are not likely to be bad again. And of course, as with any new strategy, ensure that you implement the appropriate processes and controls for testing, monitoring, and refinement of your new strategies. Now let's look for some of the diamonds in the invisibles population. The invisibles are everywhere. There are approximately 45 million adult potential borrowers who are unable to be scored, representing about 20% of all eligible borrowers. Of this 45 million, about 26 million of those borrowers have no credit history in the U.S. traditional credit bureaus, and the other 19 million have thin or limited and or unscorable credit history. Now, it's important to note here that the CFPB in particular is focused on offering declined consumers a second look through alternative data such as phone payments, utilities, rental history, etc., hence the need for a solid second look strategy. The right side of this slide provides some numbers about various segments within the invisibles. I'm not going to walk through these in detail, but the key takeaway here is that there is tremendous opportunity within this population. In large part due to digitalization and emerging market disruptors, the invisible segment increasingly includes prospects who are thin by choice. John, I think you have some thoughts to share about the perspectives from the non-bank lenders regarding the thin by choice population.
Yeah, sure. Michelle, thank you. It's interesting to see how thin file definitions have shifted over time. And as of late, from a non-bank perspective, there's certainly a variety of studies and opinions on the topic of thin by choice. And honestly, I've personally seen varied estimates on the number of consumers that fit this description, as well as forecasts and theories around their purchasing power. For example, one that sticks in my mind is I saw an estimate that suggests that there's roughly somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 million consumers between the ages of 18 and 34, and the purchasing power is something greater than $1 trillion in the U.S. alone. But nonetheless, regardless of actual numbers and source, I think it's pretty clear the consensus is that this notion of a thin by choice population certainly is germane and creates an amazing addressable market. And then when you sit back and think, well, why is this the case? Obviously, there's I think a few obvious factors that contribute to this. We're first coming up on 8 years, believe it or not, since the financial crisis of 2008. So a 25-year-old today was in high school back then, and it's certainly argued that many of these consumers were at, say, an impressionable age and just simply chose not to lever up using debit cards versus credit cards. And then, of course, not to mention post the Card Act that was passed in May of 2009, it wasn't necessarily as easy to get a credit card. So many just simply opted out. And then, of course, if you look at the FICO-based underwriting and traditional credit models that are looking for or expect a couple years of payment history, I think the result is a population of folks that may be good credit risk but are tagged otherwise. And I've heard it referred to as misplaced risk, and I've seen examples of consumers with great jobs, strong cash flow, but have a very thin file for the aforementioned reasons.
Thanks, John. So how can you shine the light to find a few of the what we call as the sparkling diamonds amidst this segment of invisibles? Well, similar to what I spoke to with regards to the rising stars, consider if you have strict knockout criteria, particularly centered around scores or lack thereof, that are prohibiting deliberate exploration of this population. If you answer yes, then you want to address and tackle the need for some experimentation with your credit policy to try and broaden it a bit. Consider exploring the variables listed here in number 2 as ways to find some of the gems. In particular, I want to draw your attention to the NSCRAs, meaning the Nationwide Specialty Consumer Reporting Agencies. As for potential customers with thin to no credit history at the traditional credit bureaus, this data can provide some insights into payment history. And of course, ensure that you have processes and controls in place to monitor to determine when you need to refine your approach. Another potential action item is go to your history and pull data files for the 21 to 30-year-old segment, comparing 2006 and present day up through 2015. And consider how have things like their credit history, income, and DTI distributions changed within this population. Are you seeing any differences in the decline drivers among this population? After you examine those differences, then think about and identify any variables that you might be able to build into your strategies to provide a second chance for applicants and customers that might now be overlooked. And again, I very specifically talk about applicants and customers because while at first blush this may seem to be strictly an origination strategy, we also assert that you can apply many of these same concepts to your portfolio and line management strategies as well. So to summarize, to find those diamonds in the rough, your policies need to recognize that the traditional correlations that we've been accustomed to among the ability to repay, willingness to pay, and especially credit history really are in new territory. Your strategy needs to understand the full segment of potential customers and existing customers that are credit eligible. You know, the reality is that there were a number of exogenous shocks that came about during the financial crisis. And as we've discussed thus far, we think these have resulted in a bit of a misclassification of what are currently identified to be high credit risk populations. In other words, there are non-repeaters in this population that you can mine. For numerous reasons, including immigration, changing socioeconomics, and self-selection, a number of the attributes that John hit on, the no-file and thin-file populations are not only large, but are also comprised of some sound credit risk segments. Bottom line, every picture tells a story as long as it is a largely complete picture. So, in conclusion, it's time to think about growth again. I want to summarize again for you the growth strategies that we reviewed today. Understand the customer experience. You need to know what your current and prospective customers want, how they want to interact with you, and offer products and services that satisfy them and thus differentiate you from the competition. Examine your retention strategies. Ensure that you are delivering products to existing customers in a way that is priced and serviced to help you engender some loyalty in a marketplace where much of what you offer is considered to be a commodity today. Reconsider your origination and also your portfolio management strategies to go mining for the diamonds in the rough, to find those rising stars and credit invisibles that are a good credit risk. And identify ways to leverage the emerging fintech opportunities.
Yeah, Michelle, I think on that last point, I would just close by saying that marketplace lenders clearly want to capitalize on this opportunity. And, you know, look, for some consumers, banks are bad, period. And that frustration is only exasperated if, say, these same consumers are declined due to hard knockout criteria, as in my thin file example mentioned moments ago. But I do think the opportunity for FIs is to recognize this and certainly consider collaborating with the marketplace entrants for second look opportunities, certainly as you noted, where appropriate. In fact, interestingly enough, as the compliance and regulatory world continues to evolve, this is even being encouraged now by the regulatory community in an effort to get right fit products to the consumer. And I think the add-on point that I would leave folks with, and I'd make perhaps ironically, some customers are willing to pay a little more for speed and convenience, which, thinking about it, makes sense. And I know you alluded to it earlier, Michelle, but I reiterate that because I think focus just on price may not be as important as delivering that phenomenal customer service that I spoke of. So in other words, in addition to putting strategies together to figure out how this collaboration could work, I certainly would encourage FIs to also conduct some analysis of that their own intersection of process, operations, and price, and then optimize for it. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Sheridan, I think we can move to the Q&A segment now.
Thanks, Michelle. Now we'll take some questions from the audience. As a reminder, to enter a question through the web conference system, simply type your question into the chat box in the lower left corner of the window, and then be sure to click on the send button. And now I'll turn it back over to Michelle to take the first question.
Okay, here's one. You make mention of OneClick Lending, but while easy to say in concept, isn't it a situation and where that's easier said than done? John, I think this is a good one for you to take.
Sure, I did reference OneClick Lending, didn't I? Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, it's definitely harder in reality, and I think it gets back to the fact versus fiction that I mentioned. The truth be told, in the quest to find the balance between speed and convenience with sound underwriting, it's certainly going to come down to how quick the necessary data is collected, and having a robust rules-driven engine to accomplish getting to a good underwriting decision. And the same applies if a human is involved, such as the case in judgmental underwriting. It's important in that example or scenario to certainly get all of that necessary information in front of the underwriter so that they can get the deal done. What I often marvel at is this convergence of marketplace lending and incumbent financial institutions. If you think about it, tighter margin will require the need for stronger underwriting, plain and simple. So again, some of this may be aspirational to get the one-click lending. However, I think my message for today is that folks are definitely out there thinking about how to make that work.
Great. And I'm going to have you answer our next question, John, because of the work you're doing in marketplace lending. The question is, how quickly do you see marketplace lenders moving into new products such as mortgage?
Well, they certainly aspire to do that very quickly. I was at a conference 3 weeks ago in New York, and that was a hot topic of conversation. There are already examples of companies out there dealing with mortgage and real estate. I think the company is Patch of Land is one example that comes to mind. So this is not just concept. I mean, there are alternative and non-bank lenders actually focused on this. And then I think that's going to beg the bigger question of other product types, other consumer loans, and even revolving products. And so I think back to the bigger picture, the momentum is definitely there. It's moving quite rapidly. I think you're starting to see some of it in its infancy now, and who knows, by this time next year, at the pace that the sector has been going, it would not surprise me personally to see several products being offered. Now, the big picture question I have, and if you're an FI on the phone today, I think you can appreciate how challenging it is just to have one unique experience across multiple product lines that are offered. I feel that that's going to be even more challenging and exasperated from a non-bank perspective, trying to achieve that one digital experience across market or multiple product lines.
Great, thank you. Here's another question. Using judgmental review requires a high degree of standardization for exceptions. How does one go about ensuring equal treatment for all manually decisioned applicants when deploying a credit story versus a credit history approach? Good question. I'll go ahead and field that one. This isn't something that you're going to do overnight. It really requires a very deliberate, controlled, and collaborative approach. So to get started, we'd suggest that you first conduct a collaborative end-to-end review to identify where in the current underwriting process and for which customer segments some judgment is going to add the most value. And along the way, identify strengths within the current process to maintain. You're going to want to identify risks, challenges, and enhancements required to integrate judgment into the underwriting process and then develop a plan to get there. And we'd suggest starting out by testing in the form of, establish and train a smaller strategic pilot program team to test the use of judgment and alternative risk strategies into the high-value impact customer segments. Then after you've run your tests, you'll want to operationalize the learnings of that smaller team into your business-as-usual underwriting operations and then continue to iterate. And really, when you introduce anything like this, a strong governance program is really key. So manual decisioning does not mean it has to be void of automation, which is another important point. You'll obviously need to build controls and monitoring into the systems used to support the decisioning process and evaluate those results very closely to ensure that you continue to meet all regulatory and investor requirements. See if we have any. Here's another one that's come in. You talk about shining light on the invisibles through the use of new and alternative data. How have you seen this done in environments with strict IT controls and conservative views on customer data use? John, would you like to comment on that one?
Sure. Conservative views. Well, I think conservatively speaking, the use of any new or alternative data would certainly need to be handled like any other consumer report. And I think it's fair to say that the same stringent practices should exist in your lending environment today around both acquisition of traditional credit bureau information along with any alternative data. First, you obviously need to ensure you have permissible purpose in the origination process. Access to the alternative consumer reports should be controlled and limited to those who require those reports to perform their functions. So I'd say all of those same practices apply. In terms of IT controls, I would also say that you'd want to leverage the automation of your origination and servicing systems as much as possible to define where in the underwriting process you're obtaining reports. And there are a variety of alternative, affectionately referred to alternative bureaus and alternative scores that have emerged. It's interesting. I remember a time where I think in history there was roughly 150 credit bureaus, and then it came down to the top 3, and now we're back up to something like 60. There are companies we've seen that have spent a lot of time, and it feels like they just appeared on the market yesterday, but they've been around for the better part of a decade. They've invested millions of dollars into their data. So I certainly encourage folks, where and as appropriate, to test into that with the right experimental design, put the same controls in place, test it in the sandbox as if you would any other data set, and then get those learnings and put it through a continuous feedback loop to further hone your origination strategies. Certainly it's relevant, but I would say conservatively those same fundamental control points and processes would apply.
Great, thank you. Okay, I think I see one more question. There's a lot of talk about millennials and Generation X. Is there still an opportunity for growth in the baby boomer generation? I would say yes. Baby boomers are certainly exploring some of the more high-tech channels for communicating with their financial services providers. And additionally, they are part of that population that we talked about when we discussed rising stars whose traditional credit history may have been negatively impacted by the financial crisis, but now represent good credit risks. And I would add, anecdotally, from my own personal experience, some of those baby boomers are having their millennial and Gen X children teach them all of the technological advances, and so absolutely, there's growth despite the age of the generation, growth opportunity. Any more questions? Well, I don't see any more coming in, so at this point, I'd just like to thank everyone for joining us today. I'd also like to offer that if you'd like to explore any of these topics in more detail, please feel free to contact us. We've been displaying our contact information, and if you download the presentation deck, as Sheridan explained at the beginning of our call today, our information is contained in there. Feel free to contact us. In the spirit of good karma, we're always happy to just have a conversation. It does not have to be a formal engagement. Sheridan, I'll hand it back to you to conclude our program today.
Thank you, Michelle. And with that, we'll conclude today's program. This session has been recorded. You can access the recorded archive by using the same login information you used for today's live webinar. And feel free to share the recording link with your colleagues. On behalf of the Consumer Bankers Association, thank you to our speakers and, of course, to all of today's participants. Have a good afternoon, and you may now disconnect.